With the absolutely perfect conclusion to the Shadowbringers expansion and overarching story that came with patch 5.3, Final Fantasy XIV started to move towards the story of its next expansion, Endwalker, with the remaining 2 patches of the 5.x series. While not being to the same level of the 3 patches before them, these final 2 patches do quite a good job of reintroducing the Scions to the world of the Source, and to foreshadow and begin down the road towards Endwalker. Those patches are what we will be focusing on today. Patch 5.4 Futures Rewritten and 5.5 Death Unto Dawn. There will be a lot of spoilers for the 2 patches in this video, so if you wish to avoid spoilers or have not played through this part of the game for yourself, I highly suggest you go do so. But for those that remain, I wish to stall no longer, so as always, my name is Lokidum, and welcome to So I Played Final Fantasy XIV Futures Rewritten and Death Unto Dawn. Released on December 8th of 2020, patch 5.4 Futures Rewritten was the first patch I ever experienced at Endgame, having caught up with the story just a few weeks prior near the end of 5.3. And this was a very important patch for Endgame players, as I will never forget how excited and angry my FC mates at the time were about 5.4 bringing with it the first new raid tier in just under 10 months. Which of course was thanks to a little virus that fucked over development of 5.3 especially. This was the first proper substantial content patch in 10 months. So it brought the aforementioned third and final raid tier of the Eden series called Eden's Promise, a new 24-man raid for the Boshan Southern Front called Delubrum Reginae with a 48-man Savage version, and this was in addition to many updates to the Southern Front. The next stage of the Resistance weapons, the second trial of the Sorrow War Elite series and the Emerald Weapon, which also had an extreme version. There was also a new dungeon tied to the MSQ and a new Unreal trial, which in this patch was the Naval. There was also the Starlight Celebration, which began soon after the patch was released, but that's just a seasonal event, so whatever. Needless to say, this was a huge content patch that gave players quite a bit to work away at, a refreshing change for many after nearly 10 months of nothing besides the Southern Front. However, while content in this patch was abundant and great, the same can't really be said for the MSQ of the patch, which is in my opinion the weakest story patch since 2.x. Not bad by any means, just not as good as most story patches, and it was right after the end of the Shadowbringers story, which was pretty much an impossible act to follow. But moving into the MSQ, it begins with the Scions who are now fully settled back into their bodies, meeting to discuss the future. However, Lee suddenly arrives unannounced and after a happy reunion informs the group that civil war once more has broken out within Garlemald after the death of Emperor Varus. She then invites everyone to join her in Girabania for an Alliance Council meeting, of which all agreed to attend save for the warrior, G'raha, and Alisaie, who have other business to attend to. This business is to find a cure for tempering, which up until recently was thought to be eternally uncurable. But after the recent success at using the Porxies on the victims of the Sin Eaters to both rehabilitate and eliminate the process of their transformation, Alisaie is hopeful that the same method could be employed to treat tempering, and she needs the warrior and G'raha's help on her quest. Seeking to know more about the affliction before attempting to treat it, the group heads to Az's Law to try and uncover any information that the Allagans may have had about tempering. However, to reach Az's Law, the 3 need an airship, which Tataru happily announced that the Scions now own. The Lalafell happily speaks about the machine that bears the name Bonanza, and gloats about the fact that she built it herself. Now on patch day, when I was playing through this piece of the story, I was wary and was almost certain that the airship crashing would be how we entered the dungeon of this patch. But Tataru turns out to have been far more capable of a shipbuilder than a miner, and we safely arrive in the mysterious area above Apalathia. The 3 explore the islands of Az's Law in search of information nodes left behind by the Allagans, but are foiled time and time again by them being either broken or devoid of any useful information, forcing them to carry on. The search for the information is quite an enjoyable one, as not being in mortal danger or embroiled in some conflict for pretty much the first time since 3.4, the characters are allowed to have some simple yet enjoyable interactions with far more genuine and playful dialogue, like G'raha hiding away and reenacting his first meeting with the Warrior of Light, or Alisaie finding a way to have a moment alone with the warrior and have a proper conversation. Soon enough, we find what we are looking for, a node once owned by an icon researcher by the name of Owen. But one last obstacle is encountered, as despite recognizing G'raha's Allagan royalty, the information within the node is password protected, and after multiple attempts, the group cannot figure out the phrase needed to open the device, so they resolve to bring the machine to the Ironworks, confident Sid Garland could get the machine to divulge its secrets. We quickly return to the Rising Stones and meet with Kryl, who informs the player about everything that had transpired at the Alliance Council. With the Empire now at war with itself once more, the leaders have decided to turn their attention back to the primal problem. The goal is to work with friendly factions within the Beast Tribes to stop the need for summoning peacefully, hopefully killing the problem at its root, only further boosting the need for a cure to tempering. Soon after Sid arrives, and after a reunion which for Sid is no more than 2 years in the making, but for G'raha more than 300, they set to work. Using what is essentially a giant Magitech calculator, Cid manages to crack the code and access Owen's files. A hologram appears from the node and they watch as an Allegan scientist explains the mechanisms for which icons make thralls of men, and Alisaie's theories are soon confirmed. Much like when infected by the light of the flood, tempering causes the soul to stagnate. However, unlike the souls of the Sin Eater victims, which could be coaxed out of stagnation, the souls of the tempered cannot be reanimated without intensifying their already radical faith. After thinking over this new information, G'raha forms the hypothesis that an adapted form of the technique used to put the scions into the spirit vessels could be used to perform targeted reanimation within the souls of the tempered. To test this theory, Magitech terminals are needed, and due to a lack of materials, the warrior is sent to Ishgard to fetch a supply of ceruleum. We head to the Ishgard airship landing where the order of ceruleum is set to be picked up, where we bump into none other than Sir Imeric, who after learning of our quest to cure the tempering pledges Ishgard's full support, sending us off in an airship with all the ceruleum we could ever need and more. Legend says that this sudden rebate finally cancelled out the cost of Gosetsu's katana from back in Stormblood. We return to the Rising Stones and find that work on the preparation is nearly complete, thanks to the tireless effort of G'raha, Cid, and everyone's favorite douchebag, Nerotol Skeva. When the ceruleum is set up and everything is in order, Cid gives the order and the Magitech terminal starts running countless simulations. While they work away, the warrior is told to take a well-deserved rest, only to awaken to a scene of chaos as the device threatens to overload and explode. G'raha insists to let it run for a moment longer, and with a grand and explosive finish, the machine produces its results. And for the first time since it emerged, the world has a cure for tempering. Seeking to put the new cure to the test, Alisaie and the others journey to Limsa to speak with the kobold Gabu, who she and the warrior had befriended back in 3.4. Since he only showed mild symptoms of a tempering, those being simply falling mute and complacent rather than fanatical worship, he seemed like an ideal place to start, and a way for Alisaie to fulfill her promise to save him. Sure enough, the cure works perfectly and Gabu is brought back to his normal self. With this heroic victory in the books, the Scions look to assemble an army of Porxies to aid them in undoing the tempering across Eorzea. Lacking personal expertise but knowing one such expert, they journey to the Dravanian hinterlands to speak with Master Matoya. Once arriving, they exchange the normal pleasantries of Y'shtola and her mentor, immediately getting into an extremely polite argument before finally getting around to stating their business with the old Archon. Knowing the folly of creating an army of familiars by hand, Matoya lands upon the solution of creating a mother Porxie capable of creating countless other Porxies, which would make assembling an army simply a waiting game. However, to do so, we must venture into her abandoned workshop in the Maker's Quarter, which is our dungeon for the patch known as Matoya's Relict. While being a very visually interesting and fun the first time kind of dungeon, I really don't like Matoya's Relict overall. While the bosses are serviceable enough with some unique mechanics and being all around just fine, they really aren't all that enjoyable to fight, especially repeatedly as is the norm for dungeons on the Expert Roulette. And though it is one of the faster dungeons with an average runtime only being 15 minutes, it feels like an absolute eternity. Most times you have at most 6 mobs on you while wall pulling due to how small and spread out the packs are, and they really don't have all that many AoEs, so on Paladin it's just stand in the middle of them and AoE them down with no movement whatsoever. It's honestly sad. That's the major thing, but a small personal gripe is right before the final boss, it takes a solid 30 seconds for the damn teleporter to appear, and it's way faster to just use return instead of wait. But that's a dumb and very personal complaint of mine, so feel free to ignore it. But with the mother Porxie now created and tamed, it's ready to be bred into oblivion until we have a group of small clay pigs the size of the US Army. Though still quite a lot of work, it goes by far faster, and soon enough we are prepared to treat the tempering at a much wider scale. And with that accomplished, it's time to move on to the secondary plot of the patch. The next part of the patch sees us helping Admiral Merlib with her plan to come to any sort of peace with the beastmen of Vilbrand, namely the kobolds. This plan was well underway at one point, that being until her own men attempted to thwart her plans for their personal gain. So it falls to us to go and administer punishment to these dissenting pirates to get them out of the Admiral and the whole of Vilbrand's way. The warrior, the twins, and G'raha commence an investigation into these pirates and discover why they are so hell-bent on preventing peace. This band of pirates was peddling crystals often used in primal summonings, and with that being how they made their fortune, it is understandable why they would be so strongly against peace. Despite many shortcomings within our investigation and G'raha's utter lack of acting skills, we managed to take out the pirates. However, when we return to Vilbrand to report to the Admiral, we find that she's been challenged to a duel by the leader of the crystal peddling pirates, their captain meaning to spell her end. Holding to the admittedly ambiguous and often disregarded pirate code, all we can do is watch as Merlib confronts the man on the deck of his own ship. Of course, there was never any room for doubt, as being one of the badass alliance leaders, a group that includes all but Lys and Kanisana, she effortlessly dispatches the rebel, but refuses to kill him. Instead, the actual captain of the pirate band named Hilfir, who was unaware of the crystal peddling ways of his subordinates, comes onto the deck and shoots the boy's gun out of his hand before giving him a good tongue lashing. With that whole ordeal sorted out, the next phase of the Admiral's plan begins. She instructs the Scions to use the cure for tempering on the Kobold Patriarch, and that in order to draw him out, the Scions could use the stolen crystals. Perfect bait for a creature looking to summon Titan back into the world. Of course, this plan comes with some risks, namely fighting a newly summoned Titan for the third or fourth damn time in the MSQ, but as long as Eorzea is safe, it should not be an issue. With that plan set, it's time to enact it, and thus it begins. Easily enough, the Admiral secures a meeting with the Kobold Patriarch and entry into the Naval, but immediately upon arriving into that fiery pit of despair, the Patriarch attempts to summon Titan, but the Admiral is ready and quickly stops him with a well-aimed bullet. Wasting no time, Eorzea deploys Angela the Porksy and begins the work of freeing the Patriarch from Titan's servitude, though this process takes time and leaves the warrior in charge of fending off wave after wave of angry kobolds. Eventually the Patriarch is cured, but free of the Primal's grasp, the kobold is left to wither at the thoughts of his crimes against his own people. But even then, his rage continues to burn towards the Laminsons, refusing to forget their countless betrayals of the historically trusting kobolds. But after a heartfelt speech from Merlib, the kobold is convinced to give peace one last chance. And with that, the centuries of bloodshed between the two groups comes to a finish. With our business thus concluded, we prepare to return home to the Rising Stones. However, before we can, the Scions and the Admiral are approached by a Maelstrom officer who begs to be followed. With the officer, we journey to the cliffs near the ruined city of Nim and spot a strange tower jutting up from the ground. But this in and of itself is not a possibly world-ending scenario, but upon the Admiral receiving a link pearl that these towers of seemingly Garlean design have appeared all over the world, things begin to look dire. We are sent to Alamigo, where we see a giant dragon fly over our head towards the royal menagerie. Quickly giving chase, we arrive face to face with Asahi, or rather his Ascian-occupied corpse, who introduces himself as Fandaniel, the title of an office of the Convocation of 14, the same group who summoned Zodiark. The Sundered Ascian reveals his intention to the player, to bring about the second coming of the final days, to destroy the world as Amrit was all those eons ago. He also reveals that the towers will play a key part in bringing about this incomparable destruction, though he intentionally leaves out exactly what role they will play. As a Sundered Ascian, he himself should not be much trouble, so the warrior moves to apprehend the Ascian, but is stopped by the Ascian's large dragon companion, who he refers to as Lunar Bahamut, who quickly sets the rooftop garden ablaze before carrying the Ascian away to safety, but not before he can reveal that Xenos awaits the Warrior of Light at the heart of the chaos. All present are frustrated and unnerved, but nevertheless, Raubon maintains his composure and insists the Scions return to the Rising Stones in order to rest until the time when they finally have more information as to what exactly they are dealing with. Upon returning to the Rising Stones, all of the Scions gather around to discuss recent events, and come to the conclusion to seek out the aid of Estinian for the coming battles, which are already set to be the biggest that they have ever experienced, as once more the final days were upon them. Though I enjoyed this patch, I do feel like it was the weakest patch for storytelling since the late Heavensward days, but I feel that it was doomed to be so from the beginning thanks to a few decisions. But it did bring a whole host of content with it, which is what truly mattered at the end of the day, especially after a 10-month drought. While it was definitely enjoyable with lots of good character interactions and dialogue, I do feel it suffered from the choice to bring Hydaelyn vs Zodiark to a close in 6.0 rather than the original plan of 7.0. Thus, the patch not only had to set up for Endwalker proper, but also have more events that would have been key in the original plan for 6.0 that are important to Endwalker. I think the most obvious being something as important as a cure for tempering being first thought of and then found in 3 quests. And with how many important things like that take their sweet time in 14, I think that is a pretty obvious example of just condensing things. Not a bad patch, but not a stellar one that it feels sorta crowded. That's my thoughts anyway. Released on April 13th of 2021, patch 5.5 Death Unto Dawn brought with it the final chapter of the Sorrow of War Elite with its Trial of the Cloud deck in its extreme version, the final chapter of Eorzea Dark Apocalypse with its raid, Tower at Paradigm's Breach, a new MSQ dungeon, a series of events to celebrate the end of the Ishgardian Restoration called Feats, which were an utter lag fest incarnate on release, and a new Gill Sync in the form of luxury mounts. The 5.55 patch a month later also brought along the final stage of the Resistance weapons, a new battlefield called Zadnor, basically a Southern Front 2.0, which featured a 48-man raid called the Dalriada, as well as various improvements to those systems, and providing grind content for endgame players to tide them over till Endwalker 6 months later. Moving on to the MSQ side of things, the Scions are called to a meeting in Alamigo, where Thancred and Urianshe plan to reveal everything they learned during their recon mission in Garlemald. As the meeting begins, Lys informs everyone that when a group sent out to scout the tower's return, they attempted to kill their comrades, chanting the words, "Glory be to Garlemald," seemingly tempered not by a primal but by Garlemald itself. An immediate connection is drawn between the towers and the tempering, and Rabon plans to send a second party consisting of Fordola Rem Lupus and the Scion Arenvald, both possessing the Echo, therefore immune to tempering, to investigate one of the mysterious towers. While Alphino objects to his friend Arenvald's involvement, the Alamegan is determined to carry out the mission, even alongside Fordola, who no one fully trusts due to her past as one of the Skulls. But while they are off investigating the tower in Pagalthan, Alphino suggests the Scions go in pursuit of Lunar Bahamut. But before we can depart, we get a call from Tataru, who informs us that she managed to get in touch with a Stinian who is on his way to Ishgard. And knowing that few have more draconic expertise, we go to look for him in hopes of enlisting his help. Upon arriving in Ishgard and waiting at the airship landing, we manage to make contact with a Stinian, who quickly commits the cardinal sin of mistaking Alisaie for Alphino, and then proceeding to call the poor girl rugged. Of course, she is not happy with this and ends up ranting angrily at him, and then Graha goes full fanboy in the Dragoon's presence, making him quite uncomfortable. Quite a bad day for a Stinian, I must say. We proceed to accompany the Azure Dragoon on his trip to Azaz Law to meet with the dragon Tiamat, who has been held prisoner within the base since the days of the Allagans and was at one point Bahamut's beloved, and later the one who summoned him back as a primal, as well as being a dragon we spoke to during Heavensward alongside her father Midgard Sormer. So to this point, Tiamat is already very important to the story, but this is where she obtains a leading role. Upon confronting the Great Worm, we inform her of recent events, only for her to appear to be indifferent. Ysenia begins to berate the dragon and calls upon her to answer for the crimes committed against her children, the dragons of Mericidia, and her mate Bahamut. Angered at his choice of words and tone, she lets slip that she is worried that since she summoned the original primal incarnation of Bahamut and was exposed to its influence, she would become a thrall if once more exposed to him. Luckily, we have the cure for the tempering and offer it as well as freedom from her Allagan bond so that she may punish the tarnishing of her beloved's memory and the enslavement and slaughter of her children. The dragon accepts our offer and we go to find a way to have the restraints undone. After another search around Azaz Law, we manage to find the correct terminal. With those preparations complete, we move on to curing Tiamat's tempering. Though it takes multiple rounds of treatment, lots of time, and having Tiamat recounting her life before she was tempered, Alisaie succeeds at finally undoing the tempering that the Great Worm had fallen victim to over 1,000 years prior. Soon after, we free Tiamat from her chains, and receive a Link Pearl call from Urianger, who informs the group that Lunar Bahamut had been spotted in Pagalthan leading a host of enemies, both dragons and tempered Imperials alike. Alongside Tiamat, we rush to Pagalthan and enter the Dungeon of the Patch, which is unsurprisingly also named Pagalthan. This is my second favorite dungeon in the game behind the Hero's Gauntlet. The pulls are large and well paced, all three bosses are incredible for dungeon bosses, including the Magitech Core, which is a very unusual dungeon boss but still highly enjoyable. The area itself is quite nicely designed and absolutely breathtaking once you get past the second boss and get to an overlook at the tower and the surrounding desert plains. The music is great and is really unnerving. Basically everything about the dungeon is fantastic, especially the final boss, which is none other than Lunar Bahamut. And while I don't really understand or agree with the choice to make something as hyped up as Lunar Bahamut a dungeon boss, I can't really complain because it's a pretty incredible fight for a dungeon of all things, and it's something that really makes me want to stream dungeons more than ever. But that's irrelevant. With Lunar Bahamut slain and Tiamat set free to go about her own way, we speak with an Amalja chieftain who approaches us, saying that with our fallen lying alongside theirs, the time for war between men and Amalja was over, and thus did we make allies of the always badass and fearsome warriors of the Amalja, both sides wishing to focus on the threat of Garlemald. But not everything from Pagalthan turned out exactly well, and we are shown a scene of Fordola and Arenvald entering the tower only to discover it powered by the bodies of Amalja who have been woven into its walls. Meaning to save them, Arenvald accidentally activates a system within the tower that begins to draw on the Amalja as a catalyst for summoning Lunar Ifrit, who immediately attacks the two exactly where the scene cuts off. Soon after arriving in Ul'dah once more, we join the rest of the Scions in the Sultana for a meeting discussing the ill-fated mission that Arenvald and Fordola embarked upon, and are briefed on their encounter with Lunar Ifrit, as well as told of other such lunar primals found across the realm near other towers. The Sultana assures us that Grand Companies have taken care of the threat, but their strength in the past has always been overblown, so the situation is still uncertain. We return to the Rising Stones to meet with Kryl, who we learn has many rapid-fire things to discuss with us. Firstly, she means to journey to Sharlayan, the proper one and not what became Idyllshire, and petition the ever-reclusive and single-minded Forum for aid in the coming battle. Secondly, she and Y'shtola are researching why Hydaelyn has been giving us the cold shoulder since 3.4, and thirdly, she requests Estinian to lend his lance and officially become a Scion, which he shockingly accepts. Picking up the story with the .5 patch, where we are immediately sent to Alamigo to be part of an allegedly historical assembly that aims to unite all of Eorzea under a single banner. The meeting goes smoothly, with both the Alliance leaders and the different Beastmen tribes all agreeing to join forces together to stand against the new threat from Garlemald, more accurately referred to as the Telophoroi. And this is all made official with the creation of the Grand Company of Eorzea, meant to serve for the protecting and betterment of the realm as a whole without being beholden to a single city-state. Of course, this is a quite awkward arrangement, as it is almost identical to the purpose of an army of brave people represented by a crystal and led by a cocky piece of shit 16-year-old elf back in 2.x. But what could go wrong this time, right? Though visibly shaken up and sent back into a pit of unpleasant memories after the meeting, Alphinaud remains focused on a better tomorrow and begins to draft an essay about how he managed to mess up and get mutinied within about a month of starting the Crystal Braves. It should have been titled, "I Done Fucked Up, the Alphinaud Levier Story," but I doubt that was the title. Anyway, to aid him, we are sent on a realm-wide meet and greet with former Crystal Braves to hear their side of the story and try to determine the cause for the company going kaput, which, while having been a mix of things, was a large part Alphinaud's fault. Listen, while I may have come to like the idealistic elf boy now, he was an arrogant asshole, and I will continue to clown on 2.x him relentlessly until the end of time, or if he gets killed off an Endwalker. We next head to Gridania and are informed of the arrival and soon-to-be meeting with one Fortunato Levier, the father of the twins. He had come to Eorzea as a representative of the Forum, bearing an official answer in regards to the Alliance's request of aid, which, knowing Sharlayan and their self-centered knowledge-hoarding ways, is a big fat no. Despite saying it was not the problem of Sharlayan and basically, fuck you, deal with it yourself, it's a petty war and we Sharlayans are all better than you, the older elf decides that he didn't cause quite enough headache or problems for anyone that day, and in response to his children beginning to beg him for his aid and to attempt to reason with him, he decides to disown them on the spot and strip them of their last name. I'd like this guy and his ruthless efficiency if he wasn't seemingly set on seeing the world destroyed and being a pompous ass. But here we are. So he quickly leaves unceremoniously, and soon after Krylo appears, and we tell her of the events with Fortunato. She's disappointed, but not surprised, and she then informs us of the Forum's strange behavior towards the subject during her time in Sharlayan. But not willing to let things end there, Krylo decides to return to Sharlayan and begin to work on securing the Scion's access to the Western Grand Nation of Knowledge. As if the day could not be any more of a whirlwind, as Sylph arrives bearing news of the Telophoroi's march and subsequent destruction of Zelphatol while on their way to the Cartano Flats. We set out to that god-forsaken place where the 7th Umbral Calamity was brought to pass, and we prepare to meet the Telophoroi and all their tricks in open combat. On the way to the airship, however, we encounter Arenvald, who we find out that while having lived through so many events alongside the Scion since 2.x, and surviving his mission to Pagelthan, is now confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his days. With the sad sight and fate of our comrade fresh in our minds, boosting both the resolve and weight on Alphinaud's shoulders tenfold, we descend onto the Cartano Flats. The events in the flats all play out in an absolutely massive, multi-part solo duty where we have an intense battle against the Telophoroi and their horde of tempered beastmen, dragons, and lunar primals, which is absolutely incredible and lasts about an hour with all the cutscenes. We switch between many different perspectives as we take on different enemies across the battlefield, including showdowns with Lunar Odin, Lunar Ravana, and Lunar Ifrit, all complete with the original music from each of their respective trials in the MSQ, and even preserving some of the mechanics. I cannot begin to say how incredible this duty is. It flows so smoothly from one piece to another, and thanks to playing all of the different Scions with their different classes, it's like a mini tester of many different classes. These fights, with many of their mechanics preserved from each Primal's trial, is a really fun and engaging way to revisit them. And seeing a statue of our character alongside the Scions on a war map to show everyone's movements is extremely cool. All in all, the perfect high note battle for the MSQ to leave off on before Endwalker. But with the Telophoroi defeated and the Primals fallen, we find ourselves in a brief conversation with Asahi before looking out over the destruction wrought once more upon the already blood-soaked fields. We soon join Alphinaud and the others and witness together just what the world has come to at this point. Arguably in an already worse state and certainly far more precarious situation than ever before. But this time around there is a glimmer of hope. With the Scions at their individual strongest yet, the Warrior of Light and Darkness both even more overpowered than ever, and the people of Eorzea and beyond, both man and beast, finally united against the greatest threat the star has ever seen. The same threat that was once the undoing of a land of immortals. And with a final word from the Warrior of Light, everyone looks skyward at the emerging moon as the Shadowbringers theme kicks in, vocally reminding us of what had come to pass throughout the expansion while visually showing us what was yet to come. The Warrior of Light's inevitable journey to lands further than ever before. Not to mention it's a pretty damn epic track for a shot like that and to lead into credits. I've got to say, if somehow the battle that just finished did not already have me ridiculously hyped up for Endwalker, this took it to a whole new level. And while you could analyze it for symbolism all day, with the dark clouds parting and revealing the bright moon, representing the player's return to becoming the warrior of light rather than darkness, or being a glimmer of hope among a seemingly hopeless and dark situation, and yeah, analysis is what my brain immediately went to, but there is no arguing it's the perfect way to cap off Shadowbringers and place the final brick on the road to Endwalker. The patch concludes with two scenes standing in complete opposition of each other, but end the same way. We see Xenos in the burning ruins of Garlemald alongside a pile of bodies, consulting with Fandaniel about means of destruction and their goal of destroying the entire world. And then we see the Warrior of Light alongside their friends arriving back in the lush land of Mordana, where they encounter a corporeal form of what can only be assumed and is basically confirmed to be Venat, the heart of Hydaelyn, telling the player that they are the last hope and that the fate of the stars rests in their hands. But while these two scenes show two completely opposite sides and opposite circumstances, both end with their focused character gazing up at the moon, extremely reminiscent of that one transition from Xenos to the Warrior in the Endwalker trailer that I lost my absolute shit over. But that is patch 5.5, which I think to have been pretty incredible with its amazing dungeons, solo duty, high stakes, action-packed, and political story, and was the perfect setup for Endwalker, especially in terms of getting everyone super hyped up. Though in a patch called Death Unto Dawn, no one died. That is except for Arenvald's hopes and dreams, which he then threw onto Alphinaud. I feel sort of ripped off in that regard. Well, not quite as good as the 3 patches that came before it, largely due to 5.4, which I strongly believe to have suffered from storyline compression. These patches overall tell an engaging story and pave the road smoothly to Endwalker, and end with what I believe to be the most exciting cliffhanger of an X.55 patch to date, with nothing before it, including the reveal of the X-Arc before Shadowbringers, coming anywhere close. But with that, the story of the Shadowbringers era comes to a close, and we are currently awaiting the arrival of Endwalker, and since Final Fantasy XIV is my favorite story ever told, the upcoming conclusion to the overall story arc is both extremely exciting and also terrifying. But now this series is caught up to date on FF14. 12 episodes, and we are here, and what a time it has been. Thank you all so much for your support on this series over the past 8 months and for helping to grow the channel. It really has meant the world to me. Plans for the Endwalker episode is to have it out about a month after the expansion hits, as it will likely be over an hour long, and there will be a follow-up video taking a look at the whole story arc, so please look forward to that. But for now, that is the conclusion to this series. If you've enjoyed the video and haven't already, please do leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. It really does help out a lot. But with that, as always, my name is Lokidum. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.